black woman opened a hidden cedar chest in her cowboy husband's house, and every letter inside carried her name. Snow rattled against the window as Evelyn lifted the lid of the cedar chest hidden behind the wall. Her fingers froze above a stack of unopened letters. Each envelope bore her name in the same careful handwriting. The oldest one was dated 9 years earlier. In the next room, a floorboard creaked. Wyatt had returned home sooner than expected, and Evelyn still hadn't read the first letter. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and join us for more unforgettable stories. Winter arrived early in Bitter Creek Valley that year. The first hard frost came before most ranchers had finished stacking hay, and by the second week of November, the grass along the creek beds crackled beneath a boot. The wind rolled down from the mountains without mercy, carrying dust, cold, and the promise of a long season ahead. Evelyn Brooks stood beside the narrow bed in her rented room above Martha Quinn's boarding house and read the note again. November 30th. That was the date. Martha had written it neatly on the bottom of the page. Her nephew needed the room. Business was business, nothing personal. Evelyn folded the paper and slipped it into her sewing basket. The basket wasn't very full anymore. A few spools of thread, 2 needles, a receipt from the general store, $3.12 wrapped inside a handkerchief. That was nearly everything she had left. For weeks, fewer people had brought work to her. Folks were saving money for winter. Torn coats stayed torn a little longer. Worn blankets got one more season before replacement. Every day, the pile of repairs grew smaller. Every night, the silence in her room grew larger. 3 nights later, she stopped pretending another answer would appear. Before dawn, she saddled her old mule, packed 1 carpet bag, and started north toward High Ridge Ranch. The road wound through frozen grassland silvered with frost. A herd of cattle stood clustered behind a fence line, steam rising from their backs into the pale morning air. Evelyn kept writing. She had rehearsed the words 100 times. By the time the ranch house came into view beneath the mountains, her hands were cold inside her gloves, and her stomach felt hollow. The house sat alone against the winter sky, strong, quiet, much like the man who lived inside it. Wyatt Carter answered after the second knock. He filled the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, still. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind pushed loose snow across the porch boards. Evelyn lifted her chin. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I've come to ask for something unusual." His expression didn't change. "I need a practical arrangement. A marriage. Nothing romantic. Nothing expected beyond what we agree to. I can cook, I can work, I can keep a house running. I only need a place to survive the winter." The words sounded smaller once they were spoken aloud. Wyatt studied her quietly, not surprised, not amused, just listening. Then he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "It's too cold to stand out here." The warmth inside stopped her immediately. Not because of the fire, because of the room. Sunlight poured through an east-facing window. Beside it stood a wooden sewing chair. The height was perfect. Next to it hung a narrow rack built for thread spools and folded fabric. Evelyn stared. Her eyes moved slowly across the polished wood, then farther into the house, toward a hallway, toward a closed door near the kitchen. Ready. That room looked ready, not recently cleaned, not hurriedly prepared. Ready, as though someone had expected it to be occupied. She forced herself to look away. Coincidences happened. They had to. Didn't they? That evening, Wyatt showed her the small room behind the kitchen. A quilt lay folded neatly on the bed. A wash basin stood beside the window. A lamp waited on the table. Everything clean. Everything prepared. Outside, darkness settled over the valley. Inside, the house remained quiet. After Wyatt retired to his room, Evelyn wandered into the kitchen for a glass of water. The fire had burned low. A tin sat beside the stove. She opened it. The scent reached her immediately. Herbal tea. The exact blend she had bought from Cedar Bluff for years whenever she could afford it. She stood motionless, the tin warm in her hands. No one knew she drank that tea. No one. Not Martha. Not Pastor Henry. Certainly not Wyatt Carter. Yet somehow it was here, waiting. Evelyn slowly closed the lid. Then she looked toward the dark hallway. And for the first time since arriving, a quiet question settled into her mind. How much did Wyatt Carter know about her? And why? The questions followed Evelyn through the next several days like shadows moving just beyond the edge of sight. She never asked them aloud. Instead, she settled into the rhythm of the ranch. Mornings began before sunrise. She lit the stove, mixed biscuit dough in a chipped stoneware bowl, filled the kettle, opened the kitchen door to shake crumbs from the rug, while dawn spread pale blue light across the valley. Wyatt was usually already outside. She would hear him before she saw him. A gate hinge, the soft clink of a bucket, the low sound of cattle shifting beyond the barn. The ranch moved quietly, and somehow so did he. One morning, Evelyn carried a basket of mending to the east window. The winter sun lasted longest there. As she sat down, she noticed the oil lamp positioned beside the chair. Not in the center of the table, not where Wyatt would need it. Exactly where she would. The light fell perfectly across the fabric in her lap. She stared at it for a moment, then began sewing. The next day she noticed something else. The shelf in the kitchen where she stored flour sat at exactly shoulder height. No stretching, no bending, a small thing, but useful. The day after that, she stepped outside during a snowfall and found a stack of firewood beside the back porch, not beside the barn, not near the shed, close enough that she could reach it without crossing the icy yard. She looked toward the corrals. Wyatt was repairing a fence post 50 yards away. His back remained turned, as though he had never noticed where the wood stood, as though it had always been there. Evelyn carried 2 logs inside and said nothing. The town, unfortunately, had plenty to say. The first Saturday after the wedding agreement became public, she rode into Cedar Bluff for supplies. Snowmelt turned Main Street into thick brown mud. Wagons rattled past the general store. A blacksmith hammered horseshoes beside the livery. The smell of coffee drifted from the diner near the rail depot. Everything looked the same, yet somehow different. People watched longer than before. Conversations paused when she walked by. She felt it without looking. At Boone Mercantile, Silas Boone stood behind the counter counting inventory sheets. His smile appeared before his greeting. That alone told her enough. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "settling into ranch life already?" Evelyn placed a small list on the counter. Flour, sugar, lamp oil. Silas glanced at the paper. Must be nice finding a solution before winter. She met his eyes. "I pay for what I buy, Mr. Boone." The smile widened slightly. "I'm sure you do." Nothing more. Nothing direct. Yet the words lingered unpleasantly long after she left. By Sunday morning, the gossip had spread further. The church stood near the edge of town, a simple white building weathered by years of wind and snow. Pastor Henry Cole greeted her warmly at the door. Inside, she took a seat near the back. Wyatt sat beside her. The service began. Hymns rose softly through the room. Boots creaked against wooden floors. Snow tapped gently against the windows. For a while, everything felt peaceful. Then after the service ended, people gathered in small groups near the entrance. Silas Boone's voice carried farther than he intended, or perhaps exactly as far as he intended. "A clever arrangement," he said to no one in particular. "A warm house for winter. Not a bad bargain." A few uncomfortable glances followed. Nobody answered. Nobody stopped him either. Evelyn felt heat rise beneath her collar. Not anger. Something older. Something familiar. The feeling of standing alone in a crowded room. Then Wyatt stepped forward. No raised voice, no argument, no threat. Just calm certainty. He rested one hand lightly against the back of her chair. "This is my wife," he said. 3 simple words. Nothing more. The room went still. Even Silas seemed surprised. Wyatt looked at no one else. Only Evelyn. Then he offered his arm. "Ready to head home?" For a second she couldn't speak. Finally she nodded. "Yes." They walked out together. Behind them, the church remained silent. The ride back to High Ridge Ranch passed beneath a sky heavy with snow clouds. Neither spoke much. But once, crossing a frozen creek, Evelyn glanced toward Wyatt. He was looking ahead. One hand steady on the reins, the wind tugging at the collar of his coat. And for the first time since arriving, she felt something shift. Not certainty, not trust, but the beginning of it. That evening she cleaned her room before supper. She moved the small table closer to the window, swept beneath the bed, then paused. The floorboards near the wall looked different, slightly darker, slightly worn. She knelt down, ran her fingers across the wood. There, a faint rectangular outline, as though something heavy had once rested beneath the floor. A chest, or a box, long ago. Evelyn sat back slowly. The fading sunlight stretched across the room. The house around her remained quiet, yet suddenly it felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting for her to notice something, waiting for her to look closer. And this time she knew she would. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. 3 mornings later, Wyatt saddled his horse before sunrise. The north herd had drifted toward the foothills after a storm, and he needed to spend 2 days checking fence lines and gathering cattle before another snowfall arrived. Evelyn stood on the porch holding a coffee cup while he tightened his bedroll behind the saddle. The valley was gray with morning frost. "You should have enough firewood," Wyatt said. She nodded. "The feed for the mule is in the side shed." Another nod. For a moment it seemed like he wanted to say something else. Instead, he settled his hat lower against the cold. "I'll be back Friday." Then he rode away. The sound of hoofbeats faded into the hills. By noon, the ranch was silent. Evelyn tried to focus on work. She mended 2 canvas grain sacks, scrubbed the kitchen table, reorganized the pantry shelves. Yet her attention kept returning to the dark outline beneath the floorboards. Finally, she set down her sewing. The house seemed to be holding its breath. She crossed the room, kneeled beside the wall, and looked closer. The floor itself revealed nothing. But near the bed she noticed something she had missed before. A narrow wooden panel fitted into the wall. Small, almost invisible. The grain matched the boards around it perfectly. Only a tiny iron latch gave it away. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she pulled it open. Cool air drifted out, carrying the scent of cedar. Inside sat a small storage space, not large, not hidden particularly well, just forgotten. A cedar chest rested on the floor. Beside it lay several rolled papers tied with faded string. The chest wasn't locked. That surprised her most of all. She lifted the lid. For several seconds, she simply stared. Letters, neatly stacked, bound together with twine. Her name written on every envelope. Miss Evelyn Brooks. The first envelope was dated September 1877. 9 years ago. Evelyn sat back against the wall, The house felt suddenly very quiet. She opened the first letter. The handwriting was careful, not elegant, not polished, just steady, the writing of a man who measured his words before putting them down. The letter spoke about the autumn fair in Cedar Bluff, a young woman standing beside a pie stand, laughing at something an older woman had said. He wrote that he had never heard a laugh quite like hers. He wrote that he intended to introduce himself, and then admitted he never had. The letter ended there. No grand declaration, no dramatic confession, just a few honest sentences. Evelyn opened another, then another. Hours slipped by unnoticed. Outside, snow began falling softly across the valley. Inside, 9 years unfolded page by page. Wyatt wrote about ordinary things. The time she repaired a widow's coat without accepting payment. The spring she spent 3 days helping Pastor Henry distribute blankets after a flood. The summer she stood in the market square selling mended harness straps beneath a canvas awning while everyone else rushed for shelter from a storm. He remembered details she barely remembered herself. A blue ribbon she wore one year. The way she always carried books home from church socials. The habit of brushing thread from her sleeve while thinking. Nothing in the letters felt possessive. Nothing asked for anything. He simply noticed, year after year. One letter made her stop breathing for a moment. It was dated several weeks after her aunt's death. The handwriting looked slightly heavier, as though the pen had lingered longer against the page. There were only 3 short sentences. She's carrying everything alone. She shouldn't have to carry everything alone. I hate standing here doing nothing. Evelyn lowered the letter slowly. The room blurred. Not from tears exactly. Something quieter than that. For years she had believed those days existed only in her own memory. The funeral, the empty house, the unpaid bills, the long evenings sitting beside a cold stove wondering what came next. Yet somehow someone had seen, not close enough to intrude, not close enough to take over, just close enough to understand. She sat there until daylight faded. The cedar chest remained open beside her. The letters scattered across her lap. Outside, snow covered the ranch yard in white silence. Eventually, she gathered every page, placed them back exactly where she had found them, folded the cloth over the stack, closed the lid. When Wyatt finally returned Friday afternoon, the sun was dropping behind the mountains. Evelyn heard his horse before she saw him, a familiar rhythm approaching across frozen ground. She stepped onto the porch. He looked tired, windburned, cold, but safe. His eyes met hers as he dismounted. For a brief moment, neither spoke. Then Wyatt lifted a small paper parcel from his saddlebag. I stopped in town, he said. I brought extra lamp oil. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, not the quiet rancher, not the practical husband, not the man who happened to offer shelter, the man who had carried 9 years of silence inside a cedar chest. Something shifted between them, small, invisible, yet impossible to miss. Thank you, she said softly. Wyatt nodded once, and though neither understood where the road ahead would lead, for the first time since arriving at High Ridge Ranch, Evelyn found herself wondering less about why the house seemed to know her, and more about the man who did. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of quiet. Nothing about the routine changed. Wyatt still rose before dawn, still checked the stock tanks before breakfast, still repaired fences when the weather allowed. Yet every ordinary thing seemed different now. Evelyn noticed details she had overlooked before. One afternoon, a leg snapped beneath the kitchen chair while she was reaching for a basket of mending. The crack echoed through the room. She set the chair aside near the wall. By morning it stood beside the table again. The repair was nearly invisible. No mention, no explanation. Just fixed. A few days later she found her winter coat hanging beside the stove. One sleeve had started coming loose at the seam. She had planned to mend it herself. Someone already had. The stitches weren't hers. They were careful, strong, practical. Wyatt never said a word. Neither did she. The silence between them had changed. Not uncomfortable, just full, like a room holding more than it could easily contain. Then came the snowstorm. Heavy clouds rolled down from the mountains and covered Bitter Creek Valley in white. The road to Cedar Bluff nearly disappeared beneath drifting snow. When Evelyn stepped outside before sunrise, she stopped. A path had already been cleared from the porch to the barn. Fresh shovel marks lined both sides. She followed them with her eyes. Wyatt was near the corrals feeding hay to the cattle. His coat was dusted with snow. The work had clearly taken hours, yet he acted as though it were nothing at all. That evening, she sat by the east window with a piece of fabric in her lap. The letters remained hidden in the cedar chest, but they never felt far away. Every page she had read changed something. Every memory Wyatt had recorded seemed to follow her through the house. She looked up. Across the room, Wyatt was sharpening a knife used for cutting rope and leather. The lamplight caught one side of his face. Steady, quiet, patient. The same man who had written those letters. The realization still felt impossible. Meanwhile, Cedar Bluff continued talking. Silas Boone made certain of that. A ranch hand mentioned hearing rumors at the feed store. A woman at church stopped speaking when Evelyn approached. Even Ruth Dawson from the bakery seemed uncertain at first, though she remained polite. Then the rumors grew worse. Someone claimed the marriage had been arranged only for convenience. Someone else insisted Wyatt would end it by spring. By the following week, nearly everyone had an opinion. Silas enjoyed every minute of it. One afternoon, he rode out to High Ridge Ranch himself. His wagon stopped near the gate. Wyatt met him outside. Evelyn watched through the kitchen window. She couldn't hear every word, only pieces carried by the wind. Land, contracts, south pasture, money. Silas pointed toward the southern section of the ranch. Wyatt shook his head. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, Silas said something else, something that changed the air completely. Evelyn couldn't hear the exact words, but she saw Wyatt's expression. For the first time since she had known him, anger crossed his face. Not loud anger, not reckless anger. The controlled kind, the dangerous kind. His jaw tightened. His shoulders squared. Silas stopped smiling. A moment later, Wyatt pointed toward the road. Silas climbed back into his wagon. The conversation was over. The wagon disappeared toward town. That evening, supper sat untouched between them. The wind rattled the windows. The fire cracked softly. Neither spoke much. Finally, Wyatt pushed back his chair. "I'm heading out to check the barn." He stood. And that was when Evelyn moved. She crossed the room, opened the cabinet beside the pantry, reached inside, then placed the cedar box on the table. The sound of wood touching wood seemed louder than it should have. Wyatt froze. For several seconds, neither moved. The fire continued burning behind them. The clock on the shelf ticked steadily. Evelyn rested one hand on the lid. "I read them." The words landed gently, yet they changed everything. Wyatt looked at the box, then at her. The color drained from his face, not from fear, from exposure. The kind that comes when something hidden for years suddenly stands in the open. The silence stretched, long, heavy, neither willing to break at first. Finally, Wyatt lowered himself back into the chair. His eyes never left the cedar box. "I never meant for you to find those." His voice was quiet, honest. Evelyn nodded. "I know." Another silence. The wind pushed snow against the windows. The fire settled lower. Then Wyatt lifted his gaze to hers, and for the first time since she had arrived at High Ridge Ranch, there was nowhere left for either of them to hide. After a long moment, he spoke. "I didn't prepare this house for just anyone." His voice barely rose above the fire. "I prepared it for you." And the room fell silent once more. The fire settled lower in the hearth. Outside, snow drifted against the windows. Inside, neither of them moved. Evelyn looked at Wyatt across the kitchen table and saw something she had never seen before. Not the steady rancher, not the quiet husband, not the man everyone in Cedar Bluff respected from a distance. Just a man who had finally run out of places to hide. He rested both hands on the table. For a moment, it seemed difficult for him to continue. Then he did. "I saw you at the autumn fair 9 years ago." A faint smile touched his face. "You were helping Mrs. Mercer carry pies after she dropped a basket." Evelyn remembered. Barely. It had been an ordinary afternoon, one she would have forgotten entirely. Wyatt had not. "I thought I'd introduce myself." He looked down briefly. "My feet had other plans." A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound surprised them both. Wyatt's eyes lifted. For the first time that evening, some of the tension eased. "I kept thinking there would be another chance," he said. Then another year passed. The fire popped quietly. "I saw you after your aunt died." His voice lowered. "I wanted to help." Evelyn looked toward the window. Moonlight reflected off the snow outside. Back then she had felt invisible, forgotten, alone. Yet all along someone had noticed. Not from pity, not from obligation, because he cared. "I was angry when I read those letters," she admitted. Wyatt nodded slowly. "I know." "No, not at you." She turned back toward him. "I was angry at the years." The words hung between them. 9 years, 9 winters, 9 springs, 9 years of chances neither of them had taken. Neither spoke for a while. The silence no longer felt heavy, only honest. Finally, Wyatt reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper. He stared at it for a second before placing it on the table. "I wrote this yesterday." Evelyn unfolded it carefully. Only one sentence appeared on the page. Simple, direct, exactly like him. "I'm thankful you chose to stay." Her throat tightened. Of all the letters he could have written, it was the shortest, and somehow the most important. Because this one had not been hidden. This one had been given. Winter slowly loosened its grip after that. February gave way to March. The snowbanks shrank beside the fences. Water returned to the creek. Mud replaced ice along the road into Cedar Bluff. The town changed too. Truth has a way of traveling farther than gossip when enough people finally hear it. Ruth Dawson brought the first bundle of sewing work. A week later, another ranch wife arrived with blankets needing repair. Then another. Pastor Henry mentioned Evelyn's work during a church gathering. Before long, wagon wheels appeared regularly outside High Ridge Ranch, not because people felt sorry for her, because her work was good. Silas Boone noticed, and for once there was little he could do about it. Several ranchers quietly moved their business elsewhere after learning how often he had tried to undermine people for his own advantage. By spring, the contracts he once bragged about belonged to someone else. The valley simply moved on without him. One warm April afternoon, Evelyn stepped into the main room carrying a basket of fabric. She stopped. A new shelf stood beside the east window. Longer than the first, smoothly sanded, built with care, perfect for storing folded quilts and sewing patterns. She smiled immediately. Wyatt was outside repairing a gate. When he came in later, she ran her hand across the polished wood. "You built this." It wasn't a question. No point denying it. The corner of her mouth lifted. No point. He looked at her for a moment. Then she saw it. Not the uncertainty from winter. Not the fear from that night at the kitchen table. Peace. The kind earned slowly. The kind that stays. Months earlier, she had arrived at High Ridge Ranch carrying a carpet bag and a practical proposal. She thought she was looking for survival. A roof, a bed, a way through winter. Instead, she had found a man who had quietly loved her long before she ever knocked on his door. A man who never tried to make that love a debt she owed. And Wyatt Carter had finally learned something too. Love hidden forever remains unfinished. It takes courage to place it in someone's hands and let them choose. Near sunset, Evelyn carried the newest letter to the east-facing window. Not into the cedar chest. Not back into hiding. She placed it inside a small wooden frame and set it on the shelf where sunlight would reach it every morning. Wyatt watched from across the room. Neither said anything. They didn't need to. Outside, Bitter Creek Valley glowed gold beneath the evening sky. Inside, the house that had waited so many years finally felt complete. And for the first time in a very long while, neither of them was waiting anymore. Sometimes I think that's what makes stories like this stay with us long after they're over. Not the letters, not the mystery, not even the years that slipped by. It's the quiet truth underneath all of it. If you were standing where Evelyn once stood, tired, uncertain, carrying more than anyone could see, would you recognize the people who have been showing up for you in small ways all along? The ones who never asked for credit. The ones who stayed kind when no one was watching. And if you were standing where Wyatt stood, would you have the courage to finally let yourself be seen? Because life has a way of teaching us that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives through patience, through steady hands, through a cleared path after a snowstorm, through a chair repaired before you ask, through someone quietly making room for you before you even know you need a place to belong. Maybe that's the lesson here. The people who help us heal aren't always the ones who rescue us. Sometimes they're the ones who stand beside us long enough for us to find our own way home. I'd love to know your thoughts. If you had found those letters, what would you have done? And if this story found a place in your heart tonight, I hope you'll stay a little longer. There are more journeys waiting ahead, stories of second chances, hidden truths, enduring love, and people who discover that hope can appear when they least expect it. Until next time, take care of yourself, and thank you for spending this evening with me.